Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to do a comparison between the two high-end Android devices right now. They are super classy, but then also super shiny. So we've got the AYANEO Pocket EVO as well as the Odin 2 Portal. And each of these I would classify as being endgame handhelds within the Android space because they are so powerful that they can play anything you can think of when it comes to Android. And they've also got a lot of bells and whistles. They are both 7-inch OLED panels with high refresh rates. But with these premier features also comes a premier cost. And so one of the most frequent questions I've been getting is which one do you think is better? And so in this video, we're going to break all that down. I've got a bunch of different categories and different letter grades for each of them, and we will go through them one by one. And we got a lot of ground to cover, so if you don't already have a snack and drink, you may want to grab one. Without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first thing, I have already done in-depth reviews for each of these devices. I will leave those linked down below. So I'm going to go into this assuming that you already know what these devices are and what they can do, and so we're just going to nitpick the differences between them. But before we get to that, let's do a quick rundown of the specs between the two. We'll start with the CPU. So the Odin 2 Portal has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, whereas the EVO has the G3X Gen 2. They are very similar chipsets. In fact, they're almost identical other than the EVO has a turbo clock that's a little bit higher. But when it comes down to it, these are still the highest processors that you can find in dedicated handhelds on Android right now. In terms of RAM and storage, that's going to depend on which tier you buy. We'll talk about that when we talk about pricing. And we'll also go into more detail about the screens, but they are both 7-inch OLED, 1080p display, 16:9 aspect ratio, and the Odin 2 Portal is clocked at 120 Hz, whereas the EVO can go up to 165. So let's jump in and talk about pricing, and we will do this one device at a time. We'll start with the Odin 2 Portal. This one is still in pre-order, so the prices are a little bit lower. It'll probably go up by about $30 per handheld once they get out of that pre-order phase. But at least as of right now, it is $330 for the base model of the Odin 2 Portal. And this base model is only available in black and comes with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage. If you bump it up to the Pro model, which is going to be $400 pre-order, this will come in either black, white, or indigo purple. And it also has 12 gigs of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. If you want to max out the specs, then the max model will be an additional $100. So this will be $500 max, and it'll come with 16 gigabytes of RAM and a terabyte of storage. Now, personally, I'm not a fan of the fact that AYN has these other color options behind a paywall. If you want a white or indigo model, you've got to pay an additional $70. Of course, that does come with more RAM and storage, but I would much rather have the ability to choose any color I would like. Also, bear in mind that this price does not include shipping, so it's an additional $26 to have it shipped to me here in Hawaii via DHL. Now, comparing the pricing between the Odin 2 Portal and the EVO is a little bit complicated because they are not apples to apples. Now, during their early bird pricing of the Pocket EVO, you can see this on the far left in the red color, it was a little bit competitive with the Odin Portal. However, the Indiegogo campaign has now ended and it's no longer available via that website. You have to buy it directly from AYANEO, and so now we are in the blue category of pricing. And the tiers here do not correspond to what you would find with the Odin 2 Portal, so it's a little bit complicated. For example, the absolute cheapest model that they are offering right now has 12 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. This would put it pretty close to the Pro tier of the Odin 2 Portal, except that the Odin 2 Portal Pro tier had 512 gigs of storage. You can also see that the price point is now quite a bit higher. The entry point is $529 for this low-end model. This puts it at $130 more than the Pro version of the Odin 2 Portal or $200 more than the base model. And of note, only 2 color options are now available. They have both white and black. They used to have a retro power color model, which is the one that I will be testing with here in this video, but unfortunately that one is no longer available for sale. Now, the next tier is going to be 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigs of storage. Again, not a perfect comparison with the Odin Portal. And the pricing for this is going to be $609. And then finally, the highest end tier does match the Odin 2 Portal Max. It's got 16 gigs of RAM and a terabyte of storage. And the price for this is $669, which is $169 more than the max model of the Odin 2 Portal. And you might be wondering how much RAM and storage you need for either of these models. And personally, through my own testing, I have found that I never really need more than 8 gigabytes, sometimes 12 gigabytes if you're doing really high-end stuff like Winlator, but for the most part, I really haven't seen a need beyond the base models. And when it comes to storage, they already have micro SD card slots, so you can always expand it that way. And so my advice has always been that the base model will probably be good enough for most people. Unless you're going to be doing things like win later or really high-end emulation like Nintendo Switch, you might see a benefit with the extra RAM, but I personally haven't really seen it. So what we're going to do in this video is we are going to letter grade each of these categories as we go through. And so in talking about price here, I've given the Odin 2 Portal a B and then also the Pocket Evo a C. Now, when it comes down to it, I think that both of these handhelds are expensive, but they also have a lot of great features to them, including that OLED panel, high refresh rate screen, and really good chip. And so taking into consideration the price point here and that they are relatively high, I did give these kind of middle grades for each. And between the two, I did grade the Odin 2 Portal higher because I feel like it has more value to it just because its price point is quite a bit lower than the Pocket Evo. In other words, as I was going through each of these price categories, I never found that any of these price changes between the two were justified for the Pocket Evo. And so really the disappointment here is that the AYN base model doesn't also come in white and indigo, because I think that at $330 that one would be a no-brainer. At this point I can only really recommend it if you want to get a black model. So to put it all together, yes, they are expensive handhelds, and whether or not it's worth that much money to you is really going to depend on how much importance you put on that high-end emulation and gaming. And I think between the two, the Odin 2 Portal is the better value. So now let's talk a little bit about the overall design and materials of each of them. And I've mentioned this in both of my reviews of these devices, but they are very impressive handhelds. They both have a front glass display that goes end to end, and then they also have a bezel-less design. So you can see it just goes from the case over straight into the screen. And this does give both devices a very high-end look and feel. Now, one thing that is definitely subjective, but what I'm not a huge fan of, is that they both have a bit of a coating on the plastic on the back, which makes them a little bit slick to the touch. And this plastic coating is meant to prevent staining on the device itself, but it does have a negative effect as well in terms of leaving smudges and fingerprints. Now, with lighter color models, like on my AYANEO, it actually is not that big of a deal. It's very hard to see these fingerprints, but on a black model, like on the Odin 2, you can see that, yeah, it's really smudgy. And so this is equally negative for both of these devices. If you get a black one, you will probably get smudging. I've seen a black version of the Pocket Evo, and it did have the same amount of smudging as we're seeing here with the Odin 2 Portal. And so in terms of overall design, I'm not a fan of that plastic coating on the back of them, but overall I think that they are nicely designed. Between the two, I think that the Pocket Evo probably looks a little bit better. It's got more of just kind of a uniform look to it, whereas the shoulder buttons in particular on the Odin 2 Portal just makes it look a little bit kind of weirdly rounded up here on the top. I also think that when picking each of these up for the first time, it's the Pocket Evo that feels more impressive. The roundedness here on the front and just the nice ergonomics on the back, which we will talk about in a different category. However, one thing that I do appreciate about the Odin 2 Portal's design over the Pocket Evo is the placement of the select and start buttons up here on the top versus the home and back buttons here on the bottom. And so for me, this is a lot more intuitive. On the Pocket Evo, the select and start are down here on the bottom left, and then your Android function buttons are all over the place. You've got them here, you've got them up here, and we also have an Xbox home button. And so in terms of button layout, I think that the Odin 2 Portal is better in that regard. However, when putting all these factors together when it comes to design and materials, I did find that the Pocket Evo beat out the Odin 2 Portal just barely. When it comes down to it, I think that the Pocket Evo is just a more impressive device when you first pick it up. Now, in terms of size and weight, they are very, very similar. After all, they have the exact same size screen, and overall, they just kind of have the same dimensions. And they are both about the same height and width as a Nintendo Switch OLED. Now, when it comes to thickness, the AYANEO Pocket Evo is a little bit thicker. It feels like the Odin 2 Portal really prioritized thinness and portability. And so in just about every measurable way, the Pocket Evo is thicker, and it has a bit of a chunkier feel, and honestly, I think it feels a little bit better as a result. Like I mentioned in my previous videos, the Odin 2 Portal feels a little bit flat. We'll talk about that more when we talk about comfort. Now, in terms of weight, the Odin 2 Portal on its own is lighter than the Pocket Evo by about 50 grams. However, as we'll also talk about when we get to the comfort section, they do sell an ergonomic grip for the Portal, which I really enjoy. In fact, I just leave this permanently on my device. But that also increases the weight of the Odin 2 Portal to the point where it's actually heavier than the Pocket Evo on its own. And so going back to our chart here, I did rank the Pocket Evo above the Odin 2 Portal, and that's because that even though it is a little bit thicker, it feels chunkier and more comfortable, and is also lighter than using that grip case on the Odin 2 Portal. Okay, now let's talk about controls, and this can get a little bit complicated. We'll start with the fact that there are specific things about the Pocket Evo that are amazing. First of all, it has full-size analog sticks, which is something you really don't see in a lot of smaller retro handhelds, so I really love that. These are Hall sensor sticks in the Gillikit style, and so yeah, they feel almost like an Xbox controller. It's really great. I also really like the bumpers and triggers on this device, the triggers especially. They just are full-sized, have a nice paddle kind of feel to them, and so this combination between these sticks and these triggers are really good, especially when playing something more modern like streaming. Meanwhile, the Odin 2 Portal has relatively small sticks. They are Hall sensor and they still feel very good, but you can see that they are quite small by comparison. I'm also not as big of a fan of the shoulder and triggers on the Odin 2 Portal by comparison. These are just kind of longer in this regard, but don't really have that nice paddle kind of feel to them. And so these work, and they are full analog input, but I would definitely prefer those on the Evo. Now, one benefit of the Odin 2 Portal is that these Hall sensor sticks actually come right out, and so you can get replacements for these very easily. In fact, AYANEO has already made some on their website, and they're only $5. And you can see that they are both wider as well as taller. And so this has been a really big improvement for me. For only $5, you can basically get a better stick feel overall. It's still not at that point of competing with the Pocket Evo, but I still think they're pretty good. And additionally, this stick housing is the same as it was on the original Odin 2 and Odin 2 Mini, which means that there are stick upgrades already available from third parties, like on Etsy, that will improve it on the Odin 2 Portal as well. I'll leave a link to these on Etsy, which I just picked up, and that's because I've ordered a white Odin 2 Portal, and so I'm going to use these white ones here. But yes, these are also a big improvement. These sticks are even taller than those on the replacement Odin 2 Portal ones, and they have a more Xbox design. In fact, there are different options you can get on Etsy. And so this is actually what I've been using over the past week or so. Even though they, are obviously a mismatched color, I kind of like just the overall look. And so yes, there are ways to change the look and feel of the sticks on the Odin 2 Portal, but it's going to cost you. It's not something that's great out of the box like on the Pocket Evo. Now, in terms of D-pad, I do prefer the D-pad on the Odin 2 Portal. It has a soft dome kind of click to it. It feels like a PS Vita D-pad, so I do like this one. The Odin 2 Portal D-pad is not terrible. In fact, it's pretty good. It's a rubber membrane D-pad, but just doesn't feel quite as clicky and responsive as that on the Odin 2. However, when it comes to face buttons, I slightly prefer those on the AYANEO. These ones are just a little bit quieter and feel just kind of a little bit softer to the touch when you press down on them. By comparison, the Odin 2 Portal buttons just feel a little bit thunky and kind of clacky, and so this is probably my #1 detractor from the Odin 2 Portal overall, is just that these buttons don't feel as good as they did on the original Odin 2 or on the Mini. And then finally, the other thing worth noting is I've come to appreciate this button right here. In my initial review of the Pocket Evo, I didn't really know what it did. I thought it was maybe a home button, and it kind of is. It's an Xbox home button. And so if you're streaming remote play with like Xbox or PlayStation, when you press this, it'll bring up this system menu. It's essentially the same thing as pressing the Xbox button on an Xbox controller. And so this is really handy and not something that you can find on the Odin 2 Portal. And so in putting this all together, the Pocket Evo wins again. A lot of this has to do with the fact that the sticks on the AYANEO are better even when trying to add additional replacements to the Odin 2 Portal. Out of the box, I would prefer using these sticks on the Pocket Evo. And so really when it comes down to it, the only controls I like better on the Odin 2 Portal over everything else on the Evo is the D-pad. I think that's better, but not enough to actually make it a tie or actually beat the Pocket Evo, which I think is the winner here. Okay, now let's talk about comfort, which is going to encompass mostly ergonomics and just the overall feel of each of these handhelds. And I went into detail about each of these in my respective reviews, but I do think that the Pocket Evo is better hands down. I really like the feel of the grips on the Pocket Evo. It's got this nice kind of smooth motion to it, and there's plenty of space for your hands and enough space that you can kind of curl around as well. And I think it really fits in combination with the overall roundedness of the front here. My only complaint about the comfort on the Pocket Evo is that this front glass is really like a 90-degree cutoff right here. And so right here in particular, when I'm playing, I can feel that edge right there as I'm playing. Not to the point where it's like painful, but it is definitely sharp. The Odin 2 Portal is different because it has curved glass right here, and so the front definitely feels a lot better to me, just in terms of not actually cutting into my palm at all. However, the back here is quite a bit worse. This one does have ergonomic bumps, but they are quite thin, to the point where this is one of my main complaints about the Odin 2 Portal writ large. Now, I already did a full video about it, but there is this grip case, which you can get for like $15 or $19, depending on whether or not it's on sale, and this makes a huge difference in terms of ergonomics with the Odin 2 Portal. Basically, basically, as soon as I got this thing, I have left it on permanently because this is all I play it with. It also has a second added benefit of eliminating all that smudging that I was seeing previously, and so I really do like these grips. I think they're a game changer, especially for the mostly affordable price of like 15 bucks. And so in comparing these two, just out of the box with the Pocket Evo and then with the dedicated grip on the Odin 2 Portal, they're very close. I would say the Pocket Evo is still slightly better, but this definitely makes it a lot closer. However, I don't like the fact that you have to pay an additional $15 to make the Odin 2 Portal more comfortable. Not only that, this grip makes it heavier than the Pocket Evo, and so I think just in terms of overall comfort, I'm going to give it to the Pocket Evo again. There are ways to make the Odin 2 Portal comfortable. This grip case, bigger sticks, all of that kind of comes together really nicely, but it does take additional money and work. And so yet again here, I'm going to give the Odin 2 Portal a B because it's still pretty good, but the AYANEO Pocket Evo deserves an A. Okay, moving on, let's talk about the screens between the two, and they are very similar. We're going to be splitting hairs here. Number one, they are both 7 inches, 1080p, and OLED. The Pocket Evo does have the upper hand in terms of refresh rate, because this can go up to 165 Hz, whereas the Odin 2 Portal is limited to 120. For my part, I leave them both at 120 because that is the sweet spot when it comes to black frame insertion. This is a feature that I've talked about in both of those reviews as well that really helps when it comes to motion blurring when playing retro games. Now initially I thought these were the exact same screen because they are so similar. They get super bright, they get super dim, and they all have about the same level of brightness and dimness as well. Both of my panels also have the same issue where if you take down the brightness down to about 30 degrees or less, you start to see a little bit of a green hue to the gray tones. And so this was another thing that led me to think that, yeah, maybe they're from the same factory. However, after taking a little bit deeper of a dive between the two, I have seen a little bit of a difference. Number one, it looks like the Evo is a little bit warmer in terms of coloring and maybe a little bit more saturated than the Odin 2 Portal. You can kind of see it here in this image of Kid Dracula, where right here, like kind of along his forehead, it's a little bit more yellow and darker compared to here on the Odin 2 Portal. And these are at the exact same brightness, which is about 50%. Same thing when it comes to the back of his cape. It looks like this part is a little bit more red than it is on this one. In addition, if we look at the hair between these two Kid Draculas, I think that the Odin 2 Portal is a little bit cooler than here on the Pocket Evo. So there is a little bit of difference between the colors on them, and this is just the default colors within Android for each. Personally, I think that unless you're comparing these right on like this, you're not really going to see a difference between the two. But because we are comparing the two, I think that the Odin 2 Portal is just a little bit more natural looking. I like just the overall look and feel of this. It's a little bit cooler to my eye. And so in general, I think they are both amazing screens. They really pop when it comes to the colors and whatnot, but I do like the cooler color temperature of the Odin 2 Portal over the Pocket Evo. And again, we are kind of splitting hairs right now. And then finally, the other thing that made me think that maybe these are not from the exact same factory is that when I turned BFI on and then I used my DLSR camera, I did see that there was a difference in the PWM flickering between the two. It looks like the Odin 2 Portal is moving or flickering more frequently than the Pocket Evo. And when it really comes down to it, I think they are both excellent screens and I don't really see one being better than the other. And so I'm giving them both an A, not an S tier grade, because I think that there are some faults with them, including the fact that, we have those green tones when I take it down to like 30% brightness. And I've also seen reports for both of these devices where they are not hitting the target frame rate or they have even worse green tones to them. And so even though they are not perfect displays, I think they are very good, especially for the two that I'm reviewing here. And so I'm going to give them both an A. Okay, now let's move into a category that is definitely cut and dry, where one is much better than the other. Let's talk about audio. And the quick summary for this is that the audio on the Pocket Evo is terrible, especially at this price point. Now, the audio on the Odin 2 Portal is not perfect either. I would say it's pretty good, but it is miles better than the Pocket Evo. Let me give you a test demonstration right here. And I think it's even more apparent when there is a voice track in the audio. So let's do another listen here between the two. Into one, whereas RetroDeck is just a single image. The other major difference between the two is how emulation is presented within the Steam Deck UI. With RetroDeck, it's just a single app. So you would open this app and that will contain all of your games and you'll navigate through there. It is essentially using Emulation Station as its front end. When it comes down to it, the Pocket Evo just sounds really bad to my ears, like the whole device is underwater. And to add insult to injury, the Pocket Evo does not have a 3.5mm headphone jack, whereas the Odin 2 Portal does. Now, it is possible to just use a headphone jack, but you're going to need a USB-C adapter like this, which is going to take up your USB-C plug, and obviously it's going to cost you like $5 or $10 to get one of these adapters as well. And I did test this out, and it works fine. It, comes in stereo and everything. However, it is a bit of a hassle to have to buy an additional accessory just to be able to use headphones, especially given the fact that the audio is so poor in this. So the way I graded this out is that I gave the Odin 2 Portal a B score, just because it's not the best audio in the world, but it is miles better than the D score I gave with the Pocket Evo. Now, there is a way to improve the audio on the Pocket Evo, but it is a little bit more of an advanced topic. There's actually a whole community that's kind of rallying around this device, and there is a whole guide on how to actually improve the audio. I'll leave a link to this down below, but just bear in mind that it is a more advanced topic and it will require you to root your device. And so if you're not comfortable going that route, you can still at least read up about it. And we'll talk about this guide a little bit more in some of the other categories later in this video, but when it comes down to it, all of the grades that I did for this video are with the stock experience. So right out of the box. So not talking about, like, for example, all of these things that you can do after rooting and whatnot. And then also like the Odin 2 Portal grips and sticks that you have to buy afterwards. Okay, let's move on to a more positive topic, which is going to be the power and performance. And at the end of the day, these are very similar devices because the chips are so close. When it comes to emulation, you're going to be able to emulate just about the same thing on each of them, and the performance will be mostly neck and neck. There will be some times where one device will outperform the other, and many of those times it'll actually be in favor of the Portal, but those moments are pretty few and far between. When it comes down to it, basically anything that you can play on Android is going to work on this chipset. That means upscaling things like PlayStation 2, being able to play basically every Switch game that can work on this platform. All that stuff is going to be great. And again, I went into detail about the performance and all the demonstrations of what you can expect in each of my respective review videos. Now, if you really want to split hairs and talk about performance between the two, I think that the Pocket Evo does have more juice to it than the Odin 2 Portal. But in summary, if we look at the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test, you can see that the best loop score and even the lowest loop score are still better than the best loop score on the Odin 2 Portal of 3753. And so even though the performance will fluctuate on the Pocket Evo and it'll vary by device, it still is going to probably be better than the Odin 2 Portal, even though this one is much more stable. So when it comes down to it, you still will get more power with the Pocket Evo, it's just a little bit less consistent. Another thing that community guide I mentioned before can do is actually show you how to reconfigure some of the clock speeds on the device to basically downclock it and get better performance. In fact, there have been some users who have been able to get a score of over 5,000 on this test right here. And again, we're talking about a more advanced topic that is not out of the box, but the potential is there. In addition, if you want more stability with the Pocket Evo, instead of using the max mode, you can use the game mode. And if you do that, it will give you like a 97% stability, so much closer to the Odin 2 Portal. Now on my device, the game mode score was lower than the Odin 2 Portal, but not by much. And when it comes to real world application, the game mode on the Pocket Evo is going to be more than enough for everything up through PS2. That's basically what I use. And so I use game mode for everything except for the really high-end Switch games, and that's it. So in putting this together, I gave both of these an S grade because when it comes down to handheld devices, these are some of the best performing that you can find right now. There are some limitations within the Android ecosystem just because we don't have emulators for every single system, but among what you have available, these are definitely S tier. Okay, next let's talk about cooling, which I think goes hand in hand with performance. To start, let's talk about just overall fan noise, and at max fan, I do think that the Odin 2 Portal is a lot quieter and more pleasant to listen to than the Pocket Evo. However, in a real-world scenario, I've found that both of these are just fine, and that's because even though the Pocket Evo does have really aggressive cooling, you can adjust the profiles within here. So for example, by default, the game mode is actually supposed to be in high fan mode, but I just set it to low, and I think that that's just fine. And so when playing in game mode with low fan mode, I just basically don't hear the fan at all, and I think that's perfect. Same thing with the Odin 2 Portal. I can put it in high performance mode and then use the smart fan, and for the most part, I won't hear the fan either. In addition, in the Pocket Evo settings, you can actually make custom fan curves as well. And this is another thing that you can find in that guide from the community, is they found out like which custom curves work the best to give you the best experience overall. And so between the two, I'm going to grade the Pocket Evo a little bit lower than the Odin 2 Portal. And that's just because out of the box, it does require some tweaking with the Pocket Evo to get it to a more optimal state. By default, it's a more aggressive fan curve. And so unless you already know that you can change it, you might find this to be a negative, and so that's why I'm giving it a little bit less of a score. Okay, next I want to talk about battery life, and I want to preface this by saying that battery life on each of these devices is excellent. We're going to go through two scenarios, and both of these are kind of pushing the device just to show you what it's going to be like in somewhat of a worst case scenario. We're going to start with retro game emulation, playing a Super Nintendo game here with black frame insertion turned on and running at 120 Hz. This is at about 60% brightness here, just to make it a little bit easier to see, and we're playing both these devices in low power mode. And bear in mind that using black frame insertion as well as a high refresh rate like this is going to drain the battery more than just playing it at like 60 frames per second. In this situation with the Pocket Evo, I got 12.5 hours of battery life, which I think is still really good. However, the Odin 2 Portal, despite having a slightly smaller battery, actually gets more battery life. I got 16 hours and 48 minutes on this one. So personally, I think that the battery life on each of these devices is excellent, but yes, I found that the Odin 2 Portal does give me better battery life even in this scenario. Now let's do another worst case scenario, but this time at high-end emulation. I'm going to play a certain high-end 3D platformer with a guy who basically is a plumber who throws around his hat the whole time. And for each of these, I put them in the max performance mode and then also like the low or smart fan to give me the most stable frame rate. For the Pocket Evo, I got 2 hours and 5 minutes of gameplay, which I think is still pretty good considering the fact that we're emulating a high-end system. And also bear in mind that this is a very demanding game, and so other games within the same platform are not going to be as demanding. However, with the Odin 2 Portal, which by the way gave me a more stable experience altogether, this one was at 2 hours and 50 minutes of battery life. And so again, even though the Pocket Evo has a larger battery, 8600 milliamp hours versus 8000, I still found that the Odin 2 Portal gives me longer battery life altogether. Now on the other side of battery life is the charging speed, and I did find that the Pocket Evo charges faster than the Odin 2 Portal. When using a high-speed charger, I found that the Evo will take up to 35 watts at a time, which means that it'll charge in about an hour or even less. Meanwhile, the Odin 2 Portal will still cap out at about 25 watts. It still charges very quickly, but not quite as quickly as the Evo. And so in putting the grading all together, I decided to give them both an A. The Odin 2 Portal has better battery life, but not by much, and then also the Pocket Evo charges more quickly. And really, when it comes down to it, I think the battery life and charging speed on them are both great. So I think it's kind of a tie. Okay, so next let's talk about the software experience between the two, and again this is fairly similar. They are both running Android 13. However, the Android builds between the two are different. Let's talk about the Odin 2 Portal first. For the most part, the way that you change any of the Odin specific settings are going to be from the top-down menu. For example, here I can change the refresh rate, the performance mode, the fan speed, or the control style. All that stuff is done right here. And so I do find it pretty easy to just swipe down, change what I need to, and then go back to my game. In addition, if we go into the Google settings, they have the Odin settings, and this is very similar to what we were just talking about. So essentially all the things that we can do from the top-down menu can be done here as well, with a couple additional things. For example, these back buttons right here are programmable, and you'll do that within this Android setting here. So I can go to M1 and change it to whatever I would like. But overall, this is a very simple setup, and we've been seeing it for years from AYN, so no big surprises here. Now for the AYANEO, things are a little bit different. We have a dedicated button that will bring up a menu, and this will allow us to do things like change out our performance mode, our fan speed, refresh rate, all the same things that we saw with the Odin 2 Portal. It also has a quick menu of different controller-based things that you can do as well. However, the real secret sauce for this is going to be in what they call the handheld or IS-based settings. This is another system menu that can give you very similar options, but a little bit more robust, and more robust than the Odin 2 Portal as well. For example, within here, you can tweak all of your performance profiles and it'll save it. So the next time that you use game mode, it'll save all of your settings. Now, one new feature that was just added to AYANEO is this custom keys thing. I mean, it literally came out like earlier today, and I've been messing around with it. And so essentially, this allows you to remap your keys, including these two up here, as well as your turbo toggle, and then also this button down here. And the options that you have within here are really robust, and it's actually really impressive. So say, for example, we do this one here on the bottom right, we confirm that. Now what we can do is we can set it to either be a short click or a long click, and then we have a number of different functions we can set up. This includes things like opening up a specific app, or for example, changing your performance mode or a specific key input. It can even do things like increase your volume or the brightness of your screen. Like, it's pretty crazy. And so what I've already set up here as a demonstration is that this button up here, which usually does all sorts of random things like going back or going home, I've now set it so that when I press it, it'll turn off my LED lights or turn them back on. And you can also set this up on a per app basis. So I have it set up where this will only happen if I go into the Aya settings app like this, or if I go into Emulation Station. That's when I can turn off the LED toggles. And so there's a whole world that you can do within this custom keys thing that's really impressive. I'm really happy that they added that because as of like yesterday, they didn't have it, but now we do. However, there is one big software negative about the Pocket Evo that is not present on the Odin 2 portal, and that is that the chip that they're using on this is relatively unknown. It's the G3X Gen 2, which basically is only used in these devices from AYANEO. And unfortunately, because this chipset is so relatively unknown, many games do not support it out of the box. I showed in my previous video that Grid Legends, which is a full-on Android game that you can buy, works with the Odin 2 portal just fine, but won't even boot with the Pocket Evo. However, there are other games like Diablo Immortal where you can only do 30 frames per second on the AYANEO, where you can do 60 on the Odin 2 portal, and that's because this chipset is not supported by the developers. Now, AYANEO has done their best by using what they call device spoofing, so within the Aya settings you can choose different phones that you can actually mimic, and this will give you better results with certain games, but it comes with a caveat. If you try to use device spoofing, it gives you a warning that says that this might be considered cheating by the app developers, and so you might get banned by doing it. And so there is a bit of a risk by doing this spoofing, but it may give you better results. Now, one thing of note that I just recently learned is that you also have to reset your device after doing the spoofing like this. So here I am after spoofing this device as like a Samsung Galaxy 8 or something like that, and now when I go into 60 FPS, it actually gives me a warning, are you sure you want to do it? And look at that, we can now do 60 frames per second in this game after doing a reboot. So when it comes down to it, it is possible to improve the Android experience on this device, but it does require a workaround, which is something that I'm personally not super comfortable with recommending. I'd hate for somebody to have a cross-platform account, for example with Battle.net here with Diablo Immortal, or maybe Call of Duty, and then all of a sudden get banned with all of those accounts because they were messing around with their AYANEO Pocket Evo. So long story short, there are things I really like about the software in the AYANEO Pocket Evo, and they're trying to mitigate all of the problems that come up from using this chipset, but it is unfortunate that they have to do this in the first place. So in summary, I did give the Odin 2 portal a better grade when it comes to software, and that is because the software just works. A lot of this has to do with the fact that it's using a more prevalent chipset with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, so all the Android games are going to work fine. In addition, most of the things that I want to do with this device are easily accessible, changing the refresh rate and the performance profile and all that. I think the AYANEO software is better. They've been updating it a lot more frequently and adding new features like this new custom hotkey, which I think is excellent. But they also have an uphill battle when it comes to the chipset that they have to work against. Now, next I want to talk about just the overall return policy and service options that you have available from each of these brands. And I got to say that neither of them are very good. If we go to the AYANEO website, you see that they have a 7-day return policy. And they also say that if you just want to return the device, say for example, you decide you don't want it anymore, you've got those 7 days. And so here, you essentially are going to have to pay for your own shipping back, and then also any sort of restocking fees, for example, a PayPal fee or a credit card fee. But they do also say that if it runs into any hardware problems, say for example the device is broken, then they are not going to charge you that shipping, but you only have a 7-day window. And for many people, they're maybe not going to find all of their issues in that first 7 days, and so I think that is a really tight window, and so I'm not a fan of that. Meanwhile, on the AYN website, they have a 14-day return policy, but it is not quite cut and dry when it comes to whether or not there's a problem or if you just want to return it. Essentially, they say just email them and put in a request for a refund and then we can talk about it. And so I'm not sure if AYN is going to charge you return shipping if you just want to return the device, but I would assume that yes, they probably do. It is worth noting that they don't say anything about a credit card return fee. In fact, all they really say is that it may take a while for your credit card to reimburse you. They also say that if you run into any problems to email them and they will make it right. And so that's also very vague, but at least you have a 14-day window, which is twice as long as with AYANEO. And so for each of these devices, I'm not giving them a high grade. I'm going to give AYN a C tier, which I think is probably on par with most other Chinese-based companies, and then a D tier from AYANEO just because that return window is so short. 7 days is not enough time. When it comes down to it, buying one of these devices is not like buying a Switch from Best Buy where you can just take it back. It's not how things work. And so unfortunately, there is a risk anytime you buy any sort of Chinese handheld. And because these are so expensive, I wanted to talk about this as well, because you're putting a lot of money on the line, and it's really bad when something bad happens, like you get a bad screen or whatever. You've got to deal with that whole RMA process, which is not going to be as fully fleshed out as it will be with bigger companies. Okay, so my last category is fun factor, and this is super subjective, but basically, how much fun have I been having with these devices over the past month or so? So let's go right into the grade, and then I'll talk about why, and then also kind of go into our conclusions. So starting out here, the Odin 2 Portal got an A grade, whereas the Pocket Evo got a B. Now, both of these I would consider to be high grades. After all, they're not a C or below, and I have enjoyed using both of these devices. And personally, I thought that I was going to like the Evo better. It just looked like it was going to be more ergonomic, and it looked a little bit sharper and more professional. However, the big kicker for me has been adding on those accessories to the Odin 2 Portal, getting larger sticks for it, and then also that grip case, which makes it more ergonomic. And with those two factors combined, it basically eliminates all of the middling issues I had with the Odin 2 Portal, to the point where I look forward to using this thing every day. To give you more perspective, the Odin 2 Portal now is my primary main big handheld. It's even eclipsed the Odin 2, which was like my primary handheld for over a year. But with this grip case and with these new sticks, it's exactly what I need in terms of streaming and emulation. It's still relatively lightweight compared to like my Steam Deck or ROG Ally. And so this has been my #1 device over the past like 3 weeks now. It's not the perfect handheld. I think that these face buttons could definitely be improved, but overall it's been my main handheld, and that's why I gave it an A. Now, the Pocket Evo is a good handheld in many respects. I love these sticks, I love the buttons, I love the triggers, and the overall just feel of playing it is very nice, but it does have quite a few issues. I think it really comes down to the price point. These are very good handhelds, although the Odin 2 Portal takes a little bit of tweaking with like a grip case and sticks to make it better. They're still very good, and there are many ways where the Evo is just better out of the box. However, the low points on the Evo, things like the chip compatibility or the cooling stability, as well as its audio quality, they're all red flags for me. And I think that the current entry price of $530 right now is just crazy compared to the $330 entry price of the Portal. In fact, even the cheapest Pocket Evo is more expensive than the most expensive Odin 2 Portal, and I really don't see the price difference between the two. And so when it comes down to it, I think that those who got early bird pricing on the Pocket Evo probably got a better deal, but for everybody else going forward, it's not going to be so easy. And so even if we put value and cost aside between the two, in general, I have just been playing the Odin 2 Portal more than the Pocket Evo, and that's not factoring in things like the price or whatever. It's just the fact that I have these two devices available, and I prefer to play on my Odin 2. And again, this was kind of unexpected. I thought that the Odin 2 Portal was a bit of a dud when I first picked it up, but I will say that, getting the grip case and the sticks, even though it does cost additional money, really improved the overall experience to the point that, yeah, I think I prefer it over the Pocket Evo. And if we go back to the grading sheet, even though the Pocket Evo has more A's than the Odin 2 Portal, overall the Odin 2 Portal has a higher score. Using the numbers at the bottom to kind of tally everything together, the Odin 2 Portal gets a score of 45, whereas the Pocket Evo gets 42. And again, it really comes down to those low lows on the Pocket Evo, to the point where even in my review, I had a very hard time even recommending that device in the first place because I felt like it had too many hiccups. And so in summary, between the two, if I had to recommend somebody get a high-end Android device, I would say get the Odin 2 Portal. From a hardware perspective, there are some things I don't like about the Odin 2 Portal, but they are easily remedied with the additional sticks as well as the grip case, and I think those are relatively subjective as well. However, the additional cost for the Pocket Evo I don't think is justified over the Odin 2 Portal, so unless you can find this at like a flash sale or something like that, then it may not be worth it. Additionally, to get the most out of the Pocket Evo, you will have to do some pretty advanced configurations like rooting the device or even changing out the heat pad. And I think it's really awesome that the community rallied together to try to improve this device, but the fact that it needed so much improving in the first place does say a lot. So anyway, that's what I decided between the Odin 2 Portal and the Pocket Evo, and really the proof is in the pudding because I've been using the Odin 2 Portal as my primary device for the past few weeks, and I'm not going back to anything else. I'm really enjoying it. And even if you don't agree with some of the points that I brought up here, I hope I gave you enough data to make your own conclusions as well. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you picking up one of these devices? And if so, which one are you looking forward to? As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.